Philadelphia, in a town called Lafayette Hill. So it's a northwestern suburb.
All right, nice. Yeah, I'm about a mile and a half from Penn's campus. My wife, as you know, is finishing up her PhD, and so being close to campus makes it an easy commute for us.
Excellent.
All right, and it's also been an easy commute to be able to go watch the Penn Quakers compete the last couple years, and kind of see them rebuild the program. And the start of the movement, as you guys have kind of tagged it, has been pretty impressive to watch over the last couple years to really see that growth and improvement. Before we kind of jump into what's going on with Penn right now, today we kind of want to focus on what is the mental approach that allows athletes and specifically wrestlers to be successful. And, to kind of start us off with that, tell us a little bit about your background as a coach, what you've, kind of what your trajectory has looked like and, your time with the University of Pennsylvania's program.
Yep. So, I went to Penn. I wrestled at Penn and was an assistant coach for 2 years. And as an assistant coach, I was making an application to grad school. I really didn't, think of myself as having a career as a head coach. But then, 2 years after I graduated and still in some grad classes, my coach at the time, Larry Lockley, retired. And so the job opened up. I was 24 years old and just young and audacious enough to go for it. So I went for the job, and I had always really enjoyed, working with young people at camps, at clinics while I was in college, and got a lot of fulfillment out of that. So it really kind of was an organic take to coaching. And I was hired, at 24 years old. So I was the youngest Division I head coach in the country, and had a lot to learn. So I really, early on in my career, I tried to surround myself with, people who were exceptional coaches in wrestling primarily, but also sometimes out of wrestling, colleagues at Penn. And I think like all of us in coaching, it's a kind of a tapestry, right? We take a little bit of piece from different people. We kind of blend it into, what we feel is most meaningful for our style. And so, that kind of continued. And I think, for us, it was about, 6-7 years into it, where we really started to turn the corner and things started accelerating. And then, I was very fortunate, to build a strong relationship with Dave Schultz, Jim Humphrey, Brian Dolph, a lot of the guys that were training out at Foxcatcher, and really tap into their expertise. And I think that really helped me kind of think of a no limits, philosophy to coaching the guys at Penn. So I tried to bring that in and instill that. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times, no matter what aspect of life, sometimes we put limits on ourselves, that are just arbitrary. And so really trying to exercise that muscle of what happens if I don't limit myself has been a big part of my coaching emphasis.
Yeah. Have there been times that you look back on, I don't know, yourself as an athlete or yourself as a coach and realize that those limits that you placed on yourself had hampered your own development or the development of the team you were working with?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I think I'll credit Dave Schultz as, a good friend and mentor, and someone who really kind of blew the lid off, like what happens if, we approach things with a kind of a no limits philosophy. And, whether it was technique or, different ways to train or, scouting opponents or what have you. And it's really liberating, right? And I think it's also a much more optimistic way to approach life. It's almost kind of a, let's see if, as opposed to, projecting what some result might be. I think it's a much more positive mindset.
I would agree. And, obviously mindset is a big part of what I do on a day-to-day basis, and a big part of, the mission of Wrestling Mindset really is to try to take mindset training, standardize it to a certain extent, even though every individual and every team is going to be different and need to be approached slightly differently than others, and use that as kind of an area to give teams and individuals a mental edge, or eliminate I hesitate to say disability, but like something that is holding back their performance. I always say there's nothing more frustrating than watching an athlete that's doing everything right, that's he's got a great sleep pattern, he's eating correctly, he's training correctly, he's working on his strength and his technique, and then mentally something is just kind of holding them back. So for yourself as a coach, how significant do you think the mental side of the sport is? And do you think it's something that coaches and athletes focus enough on?
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous question and a fundamentally important question. And my answer is that, I think the mental aspect of the sport of wrestling is incredibly important. I think that, we'll ask our athletes, different times during the year, like at what point do you think, what percentage of success is mental, right? And this is assuming, physical preparation. This is assuming some experience levels. This is assuming, like technical preparation to a reasonable degree. But with those things relatively in place, most athletes will come back and say 80, 85, 90%. And I would agree with that. And yet, if you think about the amount of time that we put into it, we don't put near that percentage of time into it. If it's that important, yet we don't spend the time to develop those skills, like how are we exercising that mental preparation muscle, right? So I think it's incredibly important. Some years back, I saw a survey that came from the Olympics, and it talked about visualization, and they had surveyed Olympic athletes. And the question was, what percentage of Olympic athletes practice visualization on a daily basis, right? So daily Olympic athletes across all sports, daily visualization practice, and it was well over 90% of the survey respondents. So there's your elite athletes across all sports.
There.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
No question.
Visualization is one of those big ones. One of the ways that I have been thinking about it recently, and we've been as a team kind of working with clients and teams, is talking about how motivation or confidence it has to be something that's daily. Every day your body needs sleep. Every day your body needs food. It needs water. Every day it needs exercise if you're going to keep growing stronger or faster. Every day we need to be doing something towards our motivation, something towards our confidence. I think it's too late that day that you wake up and you need to be motivated to go work hard. If you haven't done the prep work to motivate yourself when you did feel very motivated, I think the day that you don't, I think it's a lot harder to get started. And, like daily visualization is one of those techniques that can be very effective in building that confidence, building that motivation, keeping the athlete focused and believing that it's possible. It kind of goes back to that no limits. If you can't visualize something, if you've never in your mind been able to accomplish a goal, how can you physically believe that you can go do it?
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a technique that helps there. So obviously there's lots of different mental techniques, different mental approaches to sports. What are some of maybe the highlights that you utilize with the Upenn team to try to help them grow mentally as athletes and individuals?
Yep. Yeah, I think here's getting into the tools. So we agree that the mental aspect of wrestling is incredibly important to success, right? So what are we going to do? How are we going to actualize that? What are we going to work on? One of the things that we start with early in the fall with all of our athletes is we'll sit down and we'll go through goal meeting, right? And in those goals, it's about a 3-page document we work through. We work through physical goals. We work through mental attitude goals. And we work through technical goals. We have some time in these goal sheets, some space for the long-term goals, right? The outcome-oriented goals. What do I want to accomplish this year in wrestling? What do I want to accomplish lifetime in wrestling? But we really have a very small space for each of those. And that's by design, because where we put most of the work is in the process, right? We're really focused on process-oriented goals. So knowing that here's the destination, down the road, where we want to get, what's the roadmap that gets us there? What are some milestones? What are we going to do? And then we put a piece in that typically makes people really uncomfortable, which is a date. I'm going to do X by this date. I'm going to do Y by that date, right? And then it takes it kind of from, kind of the mental imagery of, I want to be on the, top of the podium at the EIWA championships. I want to be an All-American. I want to be an NCAA champion. I want to be Olympian. Those things, are so easy to roll off your tongue, right? But how do you get there? For Brandon Slay, who went on and after Penn, went to the Olympic Games in Sydney and won gold there, we had a 3-year plan for him, process-oriented goals by month. What was going to happen over those 3 years? And I think that's where the real work gets done. But one of the pieces in that goal form is for the athletes to give us feedback, and particularly the freshmen, how they like to be talked to, and teammates and coaches supporting them pre-match. And the options are, you like to be left alone as a question, or do you, is being supportive more helpful to you, or challenging you, or making you laugh, or making you angry, right? So those are the 5 options that we give, and then we have discussion around it. Some people love jokes before they go out. They need to lighten up. They're already wound really tight, right? And, I've even been at tournaments where I've got a pocket full of really bad jokes that I break out, and it just kind of melts the tension. Other people don't want any part of that, right? And that's fine. They want a challenge, right? And so we have this discussion about, what they like pre-match, and that's one of the starters, kind of to initiate, our understanding as coaches of how all these guys are different, and we can't expect their needs to be the same. That's I think a really key to being a highly successful coach is having the empathy to understand what's most important to each athlete, understand where they are, and kind of meeting them where they are. And that takes a breadth of skill set on the coach's part. It's not a cookie cutter approach at all, in my view. So I'll talk a little bit more, and I'll give it a Dave Schultz story about kind of like expanding a skill set as a coach, which I think is a lot of fun to share. But some of the other things, back to your question, Jake, in terms of things that we'll do, we do a lot of work on just on breathing, and how breathing can reset mental focus probably quicker than anything, and how to make sure we're taking advantage of, those opportunities where we go out of bounds and there's a break, to take that really deep breath, to make eye contact with your coach, and to be able to focus, right? And or between periods, and really any break that you get, blood timeout, we ought to start that with a really deep breath, kind of refocus mentally, right? And so we practice that, right? And then as we get closer to competition, we'll do team visualization, and we'll spread guys out on the mat, and talk them through muscle relaxation techniques throughout their body to get them generally relaxed, because the visualization is more effective in a relaxed state. And then we'll talk them through, and we'll do this as a team. And I learned this from a great high school coach by the name of Kevin McCleary, who I worked with. He's out of York, Pennsylvania. Kevin and his team now, he's focused on running the tables at conference championships and NCAA championships. Those table workers are typically Kevin's. But he sat a group of Pennsylvania cadets as we were going out to Fargo to the Cadet National Championships, and took them through a visualization technique. I was the head coach at Penn, and I was watching this club coach, and I was like, this is really effective on an individual level. And there was also a kind of a team bonding that happened at that time afterwards that I really took notice of. And just for all of us to be able to take some time and pause and relax together, I think is incredibly important. Our lives are so busy, typically, the student athletes at Penn, Ivy League academic demands with Division I wrestling, high aspirations, high goals. They're all high performers, type A type, performers. So just to take 15 or 20 minutes and relax together and focus on these goals and these mental skills is really a team bonding experience, as well as us teaching them the individual skills that they can do this, on their own. Because ultimately, when we get to the Midlands or the conference championships or the NCAA championships, we can't take the whole team through visualization. So we want to train them up to be able to take them through themselves, right? And so that's a big piece of what we do.
Yeah, and I love the approach that really you just look at it like technique. Coaches coach technique every single day. They coach how to get stronger, how to get faster, how to get in better shape. And I think the more we try to look at mindset the same way, there is a way to coach this. So often, I think this, a lot of it just comes just from lack of knowledge or experience with it. And I know I was guilty of this as a young coach myself, of just telling guys, oh, you got to be confident. And then the question's always asked, well how? So, And then the more I've learned, and it's like anything else. I spent from the time I was 5 until I was 21 as an athlete being taught technique. And then there was just very few moments where people were teaching those mental skills. And I think the more great coaches look at how do I directly teach the mental skills, the better they're going to be able to impact their athletes when it comes down to that difficult position, that tournament where they're feeling extra pressure, which is what we strive to do every single day. It's what I love to do. And I didn't realize this was going to be the passion my life would take. I knew that wrestling was something I always wanted to be involved with because of what it gave me and what it did for me. And I wanted to pass that on. Otherwise, I felt like it was a little selfish, honestly. But when I started learning more about the mental approach and that it was so teachable if you have the right experience, if you've got the knowledge, or if you're gaining that knowledge, it really has taken me and put me in a direction that I've really enjoyed and really loved. But like yourself, there's a lot of great coaches that are looking to teach mindset as well. It's kind of funny. I think you talk about every athlete is different. Every athlete's an individual. It's the same with technique, right? You don't coach every wrestler to wrestle the exact same way, right? If you got a real tall guy, he's probably going to wrestle a little different than like us short, stocky guys that are about 5'6", and expecting everybody to respond, before a match to the same coaching from your end, isn't, I don't think it's going to come to be a truth. I think it's going to get you uneven results across different athletes. And it's, anytime a coach expects an athlete to meet them where they're at, rather than the coach expect to meet the athlete where they're at, I think you're going to have issues in that performance piece.
Yeah.
So obviously all these athletes are different. Are there certain trends or certain, mental outlooks that you have seen amongst the most successful wrestlers that you think are at least a good general guideline, for a young wrestler that's trying to, reach big goals, really go after big dreams? Are there certain maybe mental viewpoints or beliefs in the sport, something like, not putting limits on yourself, that you have seen that are effective for most athletes, during your coaching career? I mean, you started coaching in 1986?
1986, yep, as the head coach.
All right, so as a head coach since 1986, with a short little break there in the 2000s. So are there some of those mental approaches you've kind of seen, or those mental beliefs that you've seen allowed athletes to be successful, or maybe mental beliefs that you have seen that hold athletes back if they fall into that trap?
Yeah. I'll answer that in two different ways, and I think maybe the first part of the answer geared towards the coaches that may be listening here, and the second, to the athletes. So I'll share this story that I learned. Kind of great lesson from Dave Schultz. And, we were at a point where our team was really starting to progress and make a lot of ground nationally. And we were running into, a lot of success getting to the leg and high crotches and not being able to finish as well as we wanted to against higher level opponents. So I had a moment where I was on the mat with Dave, and, I asked him, I was like, Dave, we're really struggling with this technical area. Can you help me? How do you like to finish your high crotches? Right. And so I just wanted him, he was the master of the sport, right? He's going to just make it simple for me, I thought, as a young coach. And so he's like, well, I like to do this here, and I keep my ear really tight to the hip. That's a big key. And, this is typically how I like to finish. And he paused for a little bit, and I was like, well, that's great, because then we'll spend all of our time on that. Everybody will do it perfectly, and my problem will be solved as a coach, right? Very simple. That's what I was looking for. But then Dave, kind of being the master that he was, went on. He says, well, you could also finish this way. And he gave another option there. And you can finish this way as well. I like these. And I don't do these, but here's like 5 or 6 other ways that other people finish. And, now we were up into the double digits of finishes. And my face, I knew it was just starting to go blank, because I was going to have to remember all these precious technical pieces of instruction. And then he said, but, your athletes, they don't need to know all these different finishes. And I kind of took a big sigh of relief. And he's like, but you do. You need to know them all, because some will apply to some athletes. Others will, apply to other athletes. They only need to know 1 or 2, right? But if you want to be a great coach, you need to know them all, and then decide how they apply. And I would say that, that was a huge moment for me as a coach, just to step back, have some humility, and really think about the breadth of knowledge that I could be expected to have, or I should have of myself. And I took that responsibility on. And I think the mental approach is very similar. It's very analogous, Jake, that, not the same answer is going to apply to all the athletes. So I'll shift now and answer your question from the coaches to the athletes. And I would say a couple things to hone in on. One is, try and minimize the focus on the result and keep your focus on the moment and what you need to do next. What's the next best place? What's the next best hand fighting position? What's the next best motion? What's going to open up your attack on your feet? And very simple, first move on top, first move on bottom, and focus on these key areas and let your instincts take over, as the match progresses, right? And I think that whenever we have one of those breakthrough moments or those aha moments where we found the flow state in our competition, we want to bottle that moment. We want to remember what that feels like emotionally. We want to remember what our warm-up was like leading into that, what kind of thoughts we had leading into that. And this is the individual athlete's responsibility, I believe, to try and capture that moment, working with their coach or coaches, right? Because it's going to be different for everybody. But when you have that moment, you found that flow state, my advice to people is put that in a bottle, keep it with you. You had it, you experienced it. You can pull that out, remind yourself what that felt like, take yourself through the same warm-up, take yourself through the same thought process, and just try and replicate that as best you can. And I think honing in on that, narrows the, the requirement of what you really need to be thinking about. You don't need to create a new warm-up, every time out. You don't want to do that. Once you nail a good warm-up, stick with that and be consistent. So I think that's a really important kind of very individual athlete answer to your question.
Yeah, no, I love that. I a lot of times kind of think about it like the performance equation, right? And it's like there should be more constants in your equation in your preparation for a match than variables. The more variables you have, the more likely is that you're going to not reach that flow state. Which I always remembered as an athlete. It was like you get off the mat, you're like, Coach, I know I wrestled great. I know I scored. I don't even kind of remember what I did. It just kind of, my body just took over. And the more athletes can find that ability to just kind of almost turn your brain off and like let yourself just wrestle, and I think it's difficult, but I think all of us that have experienced it, are seeking that again. I think you're absolutely right that there are certain things that help us get there. You talked about earlier how you want your coaches to interact with you. Are you trying to be in a very relaxed mood, a very serious mood? And we'll see the difference across athletes or even across families. I was a very intense person when I warmed up, and my youngest brother, he wanted to be laughing and joking and have a big smile on his face. And it's definitely not the same answer for everybody. And as an individual, one of the things we recommend is sit down and write out what are your 3 best performances and what did you do ahead of those that enabled that? What were the thoughts you were telling yourself? And then on the other end, just like with technique, if you don't know what bad technique looks like, it's hard to avoid it. And so also look at your 3 worst performances. What were the times that you really did not perform well? And what went wrong? Was there certain things you were telling yourself? Was your mind in a certain place? Was there a certain pressure that you were putting on yourself before that match that caused that? And I think you're absolutely right to, put the focus on the moment and the performance rather than the outcome. Because I could say there's a couple matches that I wrestled that I lost, but I would still put them as one of my top 5 performances. Where whether it was somebody that had really decimated me the first time we wrestled, and then I came back and wrestled them really, really solid and was in the match, close to winning, and times that I won, that it was ugly and it didn't look very good. It didn't feel very good. I didn't want to replicate that. And, that realization that I can produce great performances if I look at this more scientifically. And, a win and a loss doesn't necessarily mean I wrestled good or I wrestled bad. It's like the way I term it a lot is if I ever wrestled Jordan Burroughs and if I got a takedown, I'm probably leaving that mat happy, especially as somebody that doesn't compete, every single year. And I think that's big for a lot of young athletes to realize is like a win doesn't always mean things are good. It can hide flaws. It can hide mistakes. And those losses sometimes are the most revealing, sometimes most significant moments in your career if you take them as such.
Yeah, I agree with that
So you've been
100%.
coaching for, decades. You've been a leader of, the Penn program for a long time. Um, you know, one of the things I hear a lot of coaches talking about is, the difference in generations and how athletes have changed over time, and, maybe how even the mindsets have changed, and that mindset maybe is more important now with athletes coming to high school programs or even college programs, not quite as prepared as maybe they used to be, whether it be with hard work, with dedication, with discipline. Have you seen a change over the decades in the athletes that you've coached or high schoolers that you've recruited? And what are your thoughts on that as far as how you handle that or how you think about that as a coach?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question, and it takes me back, when I first took the program over at Penn in my mid-20s, and I was hearing coaches, really veteran coaches that were talking about, they were saying the same things then. Kids aren't like what they used to. This generation's different, and I thought about that a lot. Just in listening and trying to be a quick learner as a young coach, I tried to understand, what the genesis of that comment was, and then over my career, I've heard coaches kind of repeat that and repeat that. And sure, kids are different. There's lots of things that are changing in the world. I mean, the pace of change in our world is phenomenal, right? However, at the same time, I mean, there's core needs of any young adult that I think are very constant, right? So I think this is the key to me. That the difference between being a good coach or an adequate coach and a great coach is this notion of empathy. And by that, I mean really understanding what's going on in that person's world, right? On an individual basis. And again, going kind of back to that Schultz technique, to be nimble enough as a coach to be able to meet people where they are, regardless of their family background, regardless of what technology is coming into play in our lives these days, regardless of economic trends or all these things. I mean, there's still core needs as humans that we all have, and to be able to serve those young adults as they go through the process of getting their feet fully on the ground, to go off into life. I mean, this is our job as college coaches. It's not our job. I feel it's not our job to comment on the difference of generations, and so many coaches, I think, kind of throw their hands up like they're not able to communicate anymore. And to me, as soon as I heard some of those more veteran coaches when I came onto the scene, my initial feeling was, these guys aren't going to keep pace. They've already given up just because things are different. And I just I watched it happen. Those coaches lose connection with their teams and their athletes, and there's no need for that, I don't think. I think as long as if the coach's emphasis is on empathy and their focus is on empathy, right? You're able to understand, have the willingness to understand what's going on in that person's world. I think that's the only way that you're going to be able to pull that extra effort out of that student athlete, is once you understand what's going on in their world, how they're feeling, how they're thinking, what their challenges are. And it's also, I think, a much more interesting way to coach, to stay current, to be contemporary, with today's modern world, and understand what's going on in the technology, right? And to be able to communicate and speak that same language, I think we grow as coaches, we grow as people, to be able to have that kind of commitment. So hopefully that answers your question, but I think it's a really important question.
That's great. I would tend to agree that, I've always tried to look at it as an opportunity. And, obviously, at my age, I'm still much closer to those age groups that I'm working with on a regular basis. But, it's an opportunity for ourselves to continue to grow and prosper. We're either growing or we're dying. Nobody stands still. Nobody stays at the same level. And as far as, I'll hit you with a little of my ancient history knowledge, because I was a history major at Penn. And, Hesiod, which is one of the oldest Greek texts, talks about the different ages of man, which is this exact same concept. There was this golden age where men were, the most moral. They lived a very long time. They were so powerful. And then it devolved into a silver age, and then eventually a bronze age, which is what they consider their own time period. And so I really think this is, either a human or a societal trait to look back at the past with nostalgia and with those rose-colored glasses of that was the perfect time. And, we can't go back and change the past, right? We can only be in the present and be planning for the future. And I think it's the same thing as wrestling. Are you trying to hold on to your accomplishments from last year, or are you trying to figure out what's the next way to move forward? And I'm forgetting the source I kind of got it from, but I was listening to somebody talk about world competitions, and they said, most countries and their coaches are studying, where the points are scored at the World Championships or the Olympics to try to plan the next cycle of training and the techniques that they're going to be working on. And then they said, and the problem is that the Russians are trying to create that next wave of technique and those next positions that are going to be their emphasis and their focus. And so rather than trying to study what has happened, they're trying to plan for the next one and what's going to work next. Very similar to the idea of generals often fight the last war, right? They take the lessons from the past and they try to take those and use those in the present. And I think as coaches, I think you're absolutely right. If we're going to create those relationships and have the impact we want, which is, my view of coaching is I want to make great wrestlers. I want to see them compete. I want to see them win. I want to see them have success and reach those goals. But in the end, I want to create a great relationship and make a better person. I really think any authentic coaching or any authentic coach that has that empathy that you're talking about has to care about an individual more deeply than just their success. We want to see the success, but we want to see them develop as a person. And if we're going to be able to mentor them and do that, we have to be able to stay relevant and connect with those individuals. So I think that's a great way to look at it, Coach. And, I would say it's probably a big reason that the Upenn program is on the rise is, you take that to your coaching. And I think one of the biggest things I've noticed is everybody on the team is there regardless of whether or not they've had to leave due to injury or, they've left the team for some other reason. They're still in the stands. They're still around on match day. And there's a huge core of people that are in college, and you can just see the family atmosphere. And I think that speaks to the relationship that you've created with them and the team culture with that empathy that exists. So I want to hear a little bit about Upenn and where you're going, and you shared a little bit about the vision with me. But real quick before we jump into that, obviously we're in this period where there's a lot of uncertainty. And a quote that I read that really spoke to me about this today was, as a leader, if you can't control the situation, you need to look to control your response. And that's where you can, find your power and find your ability to lead. And right now there's going to be a lot of people that are in tough times, people losing jobs, people struggling economically, unfortunately people getting sick and people passing away. But this is a period that, I, as an individual, don't want to stay stagnant. I want to see if I can continue to impact, not just see, I want to continue to impact individuals and teams, and I want to continue prospering in my own life, growing as an individual. So what are some things that you're doing with Upenn to make sure the team's still progressing, and what would you recommend to coaches out there or athletes out there as far as how to take this opportunity and grow during this period, when there are limited distractions?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly important question. And, I think the first step is exactly what you just said there, Jake, which is to look at this as my opportunity to figure out ways to grow, to be creative, and to be, open and optimistic about progress that can be made under these circumstances. So, for us, what we're doing, the very first thing we did is make a list of things we can't do and things we can do, right? And all of a sudden, that list of things we can do, when we put some creativity around it, it's just grown and grown and grown. So there's quite a bit programmatically that we're doing right now as coaches and as staff. With regard to our team, they're in classes remotely, so us supporting them. We have a great advantage with Matt Valenti, who's a Penn alum and a two-time NCAA champion. He runs the Center for Student Athlete Success at Penn. So Matt and his staff have provided great support around our student athletes as they're now studying remotely. So just encouraging them to have a really strong schedule, stick to that schedule, have that discipline, and kind of create a schedule that's that's holistic, that includes their physical activity, includes their studying, includes being a good family member at home, right, and helping out around home. We talk with our guys about the mental capacity of athletes and the ability to handle adversity and the ability to be resilient. So in the big picture, I think athletes in general and wrestlers specifically are better prepared for this if they tap into that. How do I handle adversity? How do I handle when I lose the first takedown or get thrown to my back off the start, right? Do I give up? Do I battle back? Do I find a way, right? And that kind of attitude applied to our current environment, I think, opens up all kinds of opportunities in terms of how we can gain strength, how we can work on our footwork, how we can work on our conditioning and overall fitness, physically and mentally. So I think there's a tremendous amount that can be done. We're also doing a lot of film review via Zoom as a group and individually. And I think that one of the things that I find as a college coach is some athletes, come in as freshmen and they're attuned to watching film and scouting opponents, and others are not at all. And this is a mental aspect of us developing college athletes to be their best, is to try and grow their circle of the ability to process scouting information without it turning into the athlete only thinking about what the other guy does, right? We want to be able to find opportunities for our attacks. We want to be able to be prepared to counterattack, knowing the tendencies of our opponent. So growing the kind of the muscles of being able to scout and process this information is something we're spending a lot of time on right now.
Oh, that's great. And I always wonder, and this is a question that we get, because one of our big focuses is, put most of your attention when you go wrestle on yourself and your plan and what you're going to do, rather than worrying too much about your opponent. But I do think there's definitely a balance for that. If I'm going into a match and I know somebody likes to wrestle from outside of ties and I like ties, I got to have a plan to deal with that. Do you think that there is a focus, do you think there's a positive way to scout and a negative way to scout as far as the way that impacts your approach or your strategy for a match?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think that like every athlete's different, in terms of their physical attributes, which you mentioned, and also kind of like their flow state emotionally, right? It's the same thing in terms of processing scouting information. Everybody's different. And I think of it like, kind of like the bullseye and the dartboard and then the surrounding rings. And we want to just, wherever we are today, in terms of being able to process scouting information and still feel free to compete, thinking about what we do, not focused overly on what the opponent does. We just want to grow that to the next ring. And, we want to be comfortable. We don't want to jump too far out of our comfort zone, but we want to be able to stretch a little bit to be able to process. And we want to get, especially, our national caliber guys that are competing at the NCAAs. I mean, sometimes we've got a very short window between rounds, and, we may have scouted that opponent earlier in the year, but we may want to brush up pretty quickly. And we need to be able to sit down with that athlete, watch some film in between matches, or the coaches will watch it and filter it to the athlete. But we want to be prepared. We don't want to be out in the middle of that match and then, like your mention of the Russians, them being a step ahead. We don't want that happening to us in our matches. We want to be a step ahead. So yes, I think, the focus has got to be on understanding what that opponent's tendencies are and how that fits with what I do really well, right? So it comes back to me. My fireman's carry is going to work on this person because he digs underhooks, right? My arm spin's going to work. They reach with this hand, I'm going to post, right? And so we've taken that film and digested it and processed it, and taken it back to what we want to do, and our focus is back on ourselves. I strongly advise against a lot of scouting close to competition. I mean, proper scouting, ought to be done, if possible, many weeks or months in advance, because it takes some time to kind of sink in, and you want to be able to take it to the mat, right? So we don't only want to watch the match if that person reaches with that hand, but we want to get reps. and probably around 1,000 reps. So how long does that take? I mean, we're talking months, right? So when we're talking really keying in on high-level opponents, a known competitor, we want ample time to be able to review the film and then take it to the mat, get our reps in, and then it's all second nature.
Yeah, and I love how you're anchoring that in like the work that you do. It's not enough just to know, right? It's there should actually be an action that takes place after that.
Yep.
I think that's really
Yep.
impactful. All right, well, thank you for that. That's one of those nuances that comes up that I always try to pick individuals' brains on that when I got an opportunity. So kind of to finish up, and because I know your time's valuable, and I really appreciate you coming on. I've learned a lot. I hope everybody has enjoyed the content that we've talked about. And Upenn is a program on the rise, and I'll have to throw it out there. I'm probably a little biased as a Upenn alum, but I think the growth in the program over the last couple of years and where I believe it's going is impressive. So can you talk a little bit about your team's vision and how you kind of created that, and what you're looking forward to and where Upenn is going as a wrestling program?
Yep. Well, I appreciate it. It's an incredibly exciting time. And we've got Penn alums, working on a daily basis. Is running the Pennsylvania RTC. So, what a great pleasure it is for he and I to be able to work together. And then Matt Valenti, one of our most decorated of all time, multiple NCAA champion. Matt's the assistant athletic director who oversees wrestling in addition to the student development, student support. So, having us being able to work together and having deep roots in the program, I think is really important. We understand the university, we understand the program inside out. And we've got tremendous support from our alumni. Penn hosted the first collegiate wrestling tournament all the way back in 1905. So our list of alumni is as long as anybody's, and they're very motivated, both behind Penn Wrestling as well as the PRTC. So our vision is really big. When I agreed to come back and take the program over, I talked with several alumni before making that decision, and I said, if I'm going to do this, we're going to go big. Are you in? And I had 100% response rate from those key alumni. If you're in, I'm in. Let's go big. And that's one of our core values, is aiming big. And so our program has had, I'll say humbly, but we've been in the top 20, the top 15, the top 10 of the NCAA before. And our mid-range goals is to get back to that place where we're challenging for Ivy League titles, EIWA titles. We're in contention, and that's going to put us in that top 10 in the NCAA range. But we want to go beyond that. We want to continue that no limits philosophy, and let's see what we can do. And I think we've got the pieces in place that are going to move our program forward, to where we're challenging for, bringing hardware home from the NCAAs, being one of those top 4 or 5 teams at the tournament. And I think our recruiting reflects that. Our first 2 classes were number 12th ranked and number 9th ranked. I remind our staff and our alumni, that's great that they're ranked coming in. Our job is, what are they ranked when they leave, 4 or 5 years from now? That's the work, right, that we're responsible for, and we take that responsibility very seriously. Coach Slay and I talk about as coaches, being the caretakers of someone else's dreams. And if you stop and realize the magnitude of what we're doing, here's a young person who has dreams and aspirations, what they want to accomplish in their sport, in their life. And we're the caretakers of those, to work with them to realize that. So that's the belief that, the responsibility that I feel as a coach. So along the way, towards those results, I think we can accomplish, setting the kind of attitudes that people will take, well after they're done wrestling, into their professional lives, into their communities, to have a no limits mentality, to be nimble in their thinking, to be really empathetic in their communities, right? So, in addition to those competitive results, Jake, those other attributes of helping foster the best in people and putting them out in the world, to make a really positive impact in whatever industry they choose to work in, whatever community they choose to live in. Ultimately, that's our responsibility on the mat and off the mat. So our goals are extremely high in both areas.
No, I'm glad to hear it. I think we lost you, Coach. Give me one moment, see if we can get him back on to finish up. All right, I think I lost you there for a moment, Coach.
Yeah, blinked off for a minute.
Yeah, well, I love to hear that. That there's a very holistic, vision for the future of Upenn wrestling. And I think one of the things you shared a little bit before with me about the vision isn't just about collegiate wrestling. There's also a senior level, a world Olympic level aspect to that. Why do you think that's a significant part of the vision, or why would that be something that you would include, and why do you think that, how do you think that helps the program or the athletes to have that be a very explicit part of the vision?
Yeah. Well, it comes from experience, Jake. We've had, decades of experience of having Olympic level athletes in and around the Penn program. We had the case in Brandon Slay making the Olympic team where he wrestled our assistant coach, Brian Dolph, in the finals of the Olympic trials. So there's two of our guys, meeting in the finals, and that's not random, right? So those guys train together. They train themselves up. So the Olympic level guys, we've got Joey McKenna, we've got Ethan Lezak and Dan Valamont. Chase Pammy just retired. Richard Perry just retired. BJ Futrell just retired. And, we're in process of new RTC athletes coming on board. We had an announcement last week with Dave McFadden, a four-time All-American from Virginia Tech, coming in. Ben Honus, who was the U.S. Open freestyle finalist, upperweight, joining on board with us. So these provide this next level opportunity for guys to train with and compete with and be mentored by, on and off the mat. So all the things we've talked about here, the mindset, for example, for our young guys to be able to talk to Joey McKenna, about the rematch with Yanni in Dallas in December. They met in the finals of the NCAA championships and Yanni won that. And then, what was Joey's mindset going into the rematch in Dallas where he won that match over Yanni in the Olympic trials qualifier to make the finals. So to be able to tap into that for a Doug Zaff or a Michael Kolioko or Carmen Ferrante and our lightweights who train with Joey is incredibly valuable. So it's the physical training, but it's also the mentoring, the friendship, and the mental aspect, the mental preparation that these elite athletes bring to the Penn team and the Drexel team, because we partner with Drexel in our Pennsylvania Regional Training Center. And it's also really important because another one of our values is the community, and community matters. So to have these athletes, serve the kids and the coaches in the Beat the Streets programs around Philly, and those young kids that are just learning about wrestling. Their schools didn't have wrestling 10 years ago. And so to help those programs develop and foster that kind of community impact, it's also something we expect, we appreciate, but we also expect it out of our senior athletes. And Coach Slay does a great job, having them, understand the term of being a servant leader, right?
Yeah, and Beat the Streets is definitely something we both have that's near and dear to our hearts. I've been coaching Beat the Streets for several years now, and really seeing wrestling prosper, I think, should be the goal of every wrestler. And that needs to be a focus in all areas. And youth is very, very important. And the fact that so many cities across the country have not had much in the form of youth wrestling, I think, has been something that's been missed in the past, and the wrestling community has seen that and really come together to start to provide a lot of quality youth coaching. I mean, I'm impressed every year. Beat the Streets is starting to produce people that are not just becoming better individuals, which is the end goal, but are having success at the national level. Angel Garcia here in Philadelphia, obviously the first Fargo champion ever from Philadelphia proper. I believe I'm pretty sure I'm correct with that. And who's I believe, going to go wrestle at Ryder this coming season.
That's right. Yep.
And seeing those kind of athletes come out of the environments they do, I mean, really should. I mean, that's the end goal for all of us, is to see athletes develop as individuals. And I know Upenn has been a very important part of the transition here in Philadelphia. And I think, as either you or someone else termed the wrestling ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, let me just, if I could, Jake, just build on that a little bit, because we talk about this Philadelphia wrestling ecosystem and, how we can help, grow the community, grow the sport at all levels, from the youth and club, beat the streets to, the surrounding 250-mile radius of the Pennsylvania Olympic Regional Training Center, to the collegiate programs at Penn and Drexel. So we just feel we're really fortunate to be in this geographic environment where we've got two Division I programs that are side by side. Drexel's campus and Penn's campus literally border each other. And then within Philadelphia, we've got the Beat the Streets program, now serving over 1,200 kids in, 30 different locations, growing the sport of wrestling. And then the college programs, the PRTC and the Beat the Streets. And what's the synergy that we can create between these organizations to help the sport at all levels? So we're really excited, and I think it's, it continues to be a work in progress. But we really don't think that there's another place in the country that's geographically located to provide these kinds of opportunities in such a strong hotbed of wrestling, already with Pennsylvania and New Jersey and the surrounding states. So it's an incredibly exciting time. I'll share with you and with the audience here that Philadelphia, we have put in to host the NCAA championships in Philadelphia. So it's a very competitive bid cycle. It's 2023 through 2026. But Philadelphia is one of the contenders, and we hope that the NCAA championships will come back here, and we'll have a great opportunity to celebrate this Philly wrestling ecosystem.
Yeah, that would be wonderful and great. Well, Coach Reina, I really appreciate your time and your knowledge, and you taking some time to share with us. And I wish you all the best in the future, and the best to the University of Pennsylvania's program. And thanks for coming on, and you stay safe.
Stay safe, be strong.